Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for a really deep exploration of something that's just completely reshaped the global music scene in the last decade. The modern boy band.
Yeah, this is a deep dive we absolutely need to do. Because the term boy band, well, it operates under a totally different set of rules now compared to, say, the TRL days, right? We've pulled together a huge stack of sources for you today, really centering on that global ranker list of the most famous boy bands right now. And we're basically using this list as a map, to navigate what's happening in global pop in 2025.
That's right, because when you hear boy band, maybe you flash back to the late 90s, early 2000s. The matching outfits, the synchronized dance moves, that squeaky clean image, the NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. But today, that whole mold is just shattered. The blueprint for success looks almost nothing like that anymore. It's driven by tech, by global access, by different sound.
Absolutely. What's really essential to grasp is that the 2025 boy band, it's all about fluidity, control, and constant digital presence. They're often self-producing, very involved in crafting their own stories, their own narratives. They blend diverse genres, sometimes really aggressive ones, high concept rap, experimental EDM, trap, even stadium rock. And they prioritize this intense, almost proprietary level of digital fan engagement that, frankly, older groups just couldn't physically do.
Yeah, it's way beyond just synchronized dances now. We're talking VLive, Weavers, TikTok, YouTube. These platforms where the demand for content is literally 200/7. And the relationship between the artist and the fan, it feels less like star and admirer and more like a really close-knit community.
Right. So to help you make sense of this huge, pretty saturated landscape, we've distilled what the sources are saying into 5 core axes, okay? These define modern boy band success. Think of them as 5 criteria, or maybe points of leverage. They'll frame our whole deep dive for you so you can see exactly why certain groups are dominating right now.
Okay, let's lay them out. First up, global recognition and reach. Are they selling out massive stadiums in Seoul, London, and Los Angeles all at the same time? That global footprint, basically non-negotiable now.
Second, and this is crucial, musical innovation. Are they just churning out standard pop songs? Or are they actually mixing genres successfully? Maybe driving new trends in sound design? That's key.
Third, and maybe this is the bedrock of modern longevity fan engagement and community strategies. How deep is that bond with the fans? How exclusive or proprietary is the content they offer? We really need to get into the mechanics of these hyper-engaged fandoms.
Fourth is longevity or sustained growth trajectory. Can the group actually weather the big structural challenges? Things like mandatory military service in Korea, tough contract renewals, member turnover. Can they keep growing?
And finally, number 5, influence in fashion, trends, and social media. Their impact really has to stretch beyond just the music charts, right? It needs to seep into the culture, defining aesthetics, driving conversations online, globally.
Exactly. So we'll use these 5 axes to analyze the giants at the top. The dynamic groups rising through the ranks, and the big structural trends that are shaping, well, probably the next decade of pop music.
Okay, let's start right at the very top. We need to analyze the groups that are really setting the standard for modern success. Looking at this ranker list, and frankly most lists like it, one group consistently sits right there at the apex. They're basically the definitive global blueprint for almost everything that followed. BTS.
Oh, absolutely. BTS, they debuted back in 2013 under Big Hit, which is now HYBE, 7 members. And their success story, it's just a masterclass in maximizing all 5 of those criteria we just mentioned, simultaneously. They didn't just burk into the US market. They fundamentally changed the rules of entry for non-Western acts.
Let's just touch on some of their structural achievements, because calling them insane might be an understatement, actually.
Yeah.
And we're talking about being the first Korean act ever to hit #1 on the US Billboard 200 album chart. That was With Love Yourself, Answer, back in 2018.
Right. A huge moment.
And then they cemented that status by becoming the first all-South Korean act to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart with Dynamite. These aren't just high chart positions, you understand. These represent actual structural shifts in the Western music industry itself.
And their non-musical influence is just as profound, really. Think about their UN speeches, particularly the ones in 2018 and 2021. That transcended typical pop celebrity stuff. They spoke about themes like self-love, mental health, encouraging young people to find and use their own voices. This wasn't just slick PR. This felt like using their massive platform to genuinely connect with the anxieties of their global audience. That hits that deep community engagement criterion. but in a political and social way, too.
It's fascinating how they achieved this partly through musical innovation, too, isn't it? Their earlier work, like tracks from the School Love Affair era, for
Yeah.
instance, they had these socially conscious lyrics. That was pretty much unheard of in mainstream manufactured K-pop back then. They were directly addressing the intense pressure on Korean students from the system.
Exactly. And musically, they successfully blended hard-hitting rap, really cinematic EDM, emotional ballads. They were constantly evolving their sound, always staying slightly ahead of the curve. That kept things fresh, kept listeners engaged.
But even a group as dominant as BTS faces these specific, really high-stakes industry challenges. The sources consistently highlight the massive structural pressure of mandatory military service in Korea for the members.
Yeah, that's huge. And it isn't just a career interruption for the individual members. For the company, for HYBE, it's a major business interruption. It requires years of careful strategic planning, figuring out staggered solo releases, keeping the brand relevant, maintaining momentum during periods where some or even all members are absent. It's a massive logistical and creative challenge.
That structural pressure is so key because it forces the labels, the companies to adapt, doesn't it? It essentially pushes the whole industry to look for and prioritize groups that are maybe more internally stable, creatively self-sufficient, less reliant on external songwriters or producers for their output.
Absolutely. That pressure directly contributes to the rise of what we call the self-producers. The need for internal control, for continuous content, even when facing disruptions. It led directly to the rise of groups like, well, Stray Kids and 17. They really embody this shift.
Okay, let's talk about Stray Kids first.
Yeah.
They debuted under JYP Entertainment, and right from the start, they positioned themselves as a self-producing group. Their main producing unit, 3RACH.
Right, 3RACHA. That's members Bang Chan, Changbin, and Han. And they are deeply involved in the songwriting, the composition, the production of almost their entire discography. It's fundamental to their identity.
And that's a really critical distinction, isn't it? Being a self-producing idol means the artists have significant creative autonomy. But crucially, it often means they command a bigger slice of the royalties, too.
Exactly. And for their fandom, who are called Stay, that connection feels incredibly profound. They perceive the music, which is often high-energy, experimental hip-hop, sometimes darker or more aggressive than their peers, as a direct, unfiltered expression of the artist's own identities, their own thoughts. That perceived authenticity drives immense fan loyalty and really strategic streaming behavior from the fans, which in turn significantly boosts their international chart performance.
Okay, so that's Stray Kids. And then you have 17, who took that self-producing concept and applied it to this massive, pretty unique structure. I mean, 13 members, that's huge.
It is huge, and their core identity absolutely hinges on that internal production capability. Specifically, you have member Woozi, who co-produces the vast majority of their hits, and then Hoshi, who leads their performance direction, the choreography, the staging.
How do they even manage that many members effectively?
Well, their unique size is managed partly through these highly synchronized subunits. It's actually a clever structural novelty. They have the vocal unit, the hip-hop unit, and the performance unit. This setup allows them to maximize their creative output. They can tailor content for different regional markets or different thematic focuses, sometimes simultaneously.
Ah, okay. So one unit could be promoting in Asia while another preps a U.S. release.
Precisely. And their performance style reflects this. It emphasizes not just complex choreography, but these incredibly intricate, perfectly synchronized movements that really highlight the massive scale and the diversity within the group. You see all 13 members moving as one, then breaking off into these distinct units. It's visually stunning. And this model has proven incredibly effective for their global expansion, selling out stadium tours across the US and Europe.
So we have the blueprint, BTS, and then these internally sustainable powerhouses like Stray Kids and 17. Now, let's pivot to a different dynamic. The contrast between the sort of new guard and the enduring veterans. Thinking here about Tomorrow, X Together, or TXT and EXO.
Right, a good contrast. TXT, often called the younger brother group to BTS, since they're also under HYBE, has achieved really rapid international growth. They've done it by focusing on strong aesthetic cohesion. Their visuals, their music videos are always very high concept. They manage to blend youthful themes, things relevant to their age group, with surprisingly deeper lyrical content, often stuff that speaks to the anxieties of transitioning into adulthood.
Yeah, their narrative structure seems really important too. They often build these elaborate concept albums like the Chaos Chapter series. They use complex metaphorical storytelling themes of magic, fantasy, but use them to explore feelings of loneliness, uncertainty, friendship. Really appeals to that modern fan who expects more than just songs. They want a whole detailed universe to explore and invest in.
Exactly. It's world building through music and visuals. Now, on the other side of that coin, you have EXO. They debuted way back around 2012 under SM Entertainment. They really represent an earlier foundational generation of K-pop, the one known for its incredibly powerful vocals, sophisticated electronic pop sounds, and strong balladry. They helped lay the groundwork for the current global wave, no question.
What's really remarkable about EXO, though, is their structural resilience. They've navigated some intense challenges over the years, major lineup changes early on, which can be devastating for a group.
Very destabilizing, yeah.
Repeated instances of members having to fulfill their mandatory military service, and just the constant shifts in K-pop trends over the last decade. Yet somehow they maintain relevance. How did they manage that?
It's interesting. They did it, arguably, less through the kind of 247 digital content saturation we see now, and more through consistent, high-quality artistic skill, especially their vocal power. It proves that foundational talent, that core musical ability, remains the absolute bedrock for true long-term longevity in this industry. They weathered storms because the core product, the music and performance, remained exceptionally strong.
Okay, so if we synthesize this top 5 BTS, Stray Kids, 17, TXT, EXO, the common thread seems clear. They don't just perform music, they actively control and create their entire universe, right? Whether that's through the lyrics, the production, the visual concepts, or even just structural adaptability to deal with things like mandated breaks. Control seems key.
Absolutely. Control and a deep understanding of how to leverage those 5 core criteria we talked about. They've all mastered that balancing act.
All right, moving beyond those absolute apex predators at the very top, let's dive into what the sources call the mid-tier battleground. These are the groups ranked roughly, say, #6 through #20 on that ranker list we're using as a guide. And this is where things get really diverse, where you see more risk-taking, more niche fan-building strategies. We're talking about groups like GOT7 NCT, SHINee, maybe iKON, While We, Monsta X, Super Junior, 5SOS, Treasure, even Brockhampton. It's a really eclectic mix.
Exactly. And for these groups, just being talented, honestly, it's often not enough. Differentiation becomes the absolute name of the game. And they achieve that differentiation either through structural novelty, doing things differently organizationally, or through really unique genre fusion, carving out a specific sonic space.
Let's maybe look at some of the K-pop powerhouses in this tier first, because they demonstrate some fascinating structural risk-taking.
Okay, who stands out there?
Well, the prime example has to be NCT. Their whole concept is called neoculture technology, and it is genuinely innovative. Maybe a bit confusing at first, but definitely innovative in its complexity. Explain that structure, because it's not typical.
Right. NCT operates under this structural concept of having multiple rotating subunits and theoretically, potentially unlimited member lineups. So you have established subunits like NCT 127, which focuses heavily on global markets, especially the US. Then there's NCT Dream, which initially had a younger concept, focusing on growth. And Wavy, which is based primarily in China.
So it's like different teams under one big brand.
Kind of, and the key is the rotation and expansion. This structural novelty allows their label, SM Entertainment, to achieve simultaneous, tailored regional saturation without completely burning out a single core group. If NCT 127 is touring Asia, NCT Dream can be prepping a comeback targeting North America or Europe.
Wow, that sounds like an almost industrialized approach to market segmentation, making sure they hit that global recognition criterion across multiple territories at the same time. Very strategic.
Highly strategic. Now, contrast that kind of structural innovation with something different. Legacy maintenance combined with artist solidarity. Look at GOT7. Their group identity, the bond between the members, was apparently so profound that when their initial contracts ended with JYP Entertainment, which is usually a point where groups disband.
Right. The infamous 7-year curse.
Exactly. Instead of disbanding, the GOT7 members made this pretty much unprecedented choice. They all signed with different agencies for their solo work, but they explicitly promised their fans, the INGAs, that they would remain a unit and continue releasing music together as GOT7.
That must have defied all the established norms for K-pop contract renewals.
Completely. It basically redefined group continuity, grounding it purely in the artist's own solidarity and their direct promise to the fans, rather than just the corporate structure. It was a powerful statement about artistic control.
Okay, then you also have the true veterans in this tier, groups that have been around for a long time. SHINee and Super Junior come to mind. Super Junior were foundational to like the early second generation of K-pop's global push.
Yeah.
And SHINee are known for constantly experimenting with their concepts and genres.
Yeah, they really showcase the resilience that comes from consistent artistic evolution. SHINee's ability to maintain relevance over, 15 plus years? They do it through sophisticated, consistently high-quality artistic output. It demonstrates that aging in this industry doesn't have to mean obsolescence if the music and the concepts mature along with the members and the fans. They survive because they simply refuse to stay static. They keep pushing creatively.
We also see really highly contrasted sounds being used to drive niche appeal in this tier.
Right.
Like you mentioned iKON.
Right. Groups like iKON tend to lean towards a more edgy, hip-hop-centric style, focusing on really powerful stage presence. That contrasts pretty sharply with, say, the darker, more intense blend of rap, EDM, and pop that kind of defines Monsta X's signature sound. And then you have Treasure, a newer group from YG Entertainment, who seem to be capitalizing on a high-energy, broader appeal strategy, and they're rapidly expanding their global footprint using that approach. This intense competition within K-pop forces us to look beyond that sister to find other models of differentiation. And here we see some unique Western and crossover acts carving out completely different niches for themselves.
Like who?
Well, take 5 Seconds of Summer, 5SOS. They originally came up from a pop rock, maybe pop punk space, playing instruments, targeting a demographic that might have gone to the Warped Tour back in the day. But they successfully navigated a pretty significant genre transition into broader, slicker pop music. That adaptability in their sound is really crucial to their sustained growth, showing they could shed some of their original branding but still maintain a core audience and attract new listeners.
Okay, what about US-based groups? We were quite prominent for a while.
Right. Why don't we, before their hiatus, focused heavily on leveraging social media, TikTok, YouTube vlogging? They targeted that traditional pop and teen market with high production value music videos and relatable, almost daily life content. It felt like a more traditional Western approach to fulfilling that 200 by 47 content demand, relying less on those proprietary gated platforms that K-pop groups often use.
But maybe the most structurally and artistically experimental act in this whole tier, certainly one that absolutely challenged the definition of a boy band, was Brockhampton.
Oh, Brockhampton, yeah. They called themselves an all-American boy band, but their structure was incredibly fluid. They often had a dozen or more members, functioning more like a creative musical collective than a traditional band.
And their sound was way off the beaten path, too.
Totally. Their genre was aggressively experimental, mixing alternative hip-hop, R&B, pop, often with this DIY, almost lo-fi aesthetic. They very consciously rejected the overly polished, manufactured look and sound of previous boy bands. They prioritized a kind of raw, sometimes chaotic creative output and authenticity above all else.
That fluid, decentralized structure is such a massive deviation from the tightly controlled K-pop model we've been talking about.
Huge deviation. But it appealed directly to that modern fan's desire for something genuine, something unpolished, maybe even a bit messy. It proved that radical structural flexibility could actually be a core success criterion in itself if it felt authentic. And we can't ignore the importance of linguistic and cultural fusion in this tier either. You have legacy acts like the Jonas Brothers making calculated comebacks, successfully bridging generations of fans who grew up with them. And crucially, you see Latin pop groups like CNCO demonstrating that fusing their Latin roots reggaeton, cumbia influences with universal pop sensibilities is absolutely non-negotiable if you want true global reach today.
So what connects all these mid-tier groups then? They seem so different. K-pop structure, Western social media focus, Latin fusion, experimental collectives. What's the common thread?
I think the common thread, regardless of their origin or style, is the absolutely crucial role of their fan engagement strategies. And these strategies are often designed specifically for differentiation. They have to be to stand out.
How do those strategies differ?
Well, we see a pretty clear split, generally speaking. The K-pop groups, as we've touched on, rely heavily on those proprietary platforms, Weverse, VLive, Bubble, etc. These are essentially gated communities managed directly by the entertainment agencies. They offer high-touch, exclusive content, behind-the-scenes vlogs the public doesn't see, live chats with members, direct purchase portals for special merch. It creates this intense, highly monetizable, almost parasocial relationship with the core fan base.
Right, that deep, exclusive connection. And the Western groups?
Western groups, while they might participate in similar things to some extent, tend to rely more heavily on traditional streaming platforms for reach, open TikTok challenges designed to go viral, and broader net YouTube content for discovery and attracting casual listeners. You could say the K-pop model often prioritizes depth and monetization through exclusivity within the core fandom, while the Western model often prioritizes breadth and virality through more open accessibility.
And what are the main challenges facing all these mid-tier groups trying to break through or sustain themselves?
The biggest challenge for every single group in this tier is simply differentiation. How do you stand out when the market is absolutely saturated with high-quality talent? And then there's the need to overcome linguistic and cultural barriers to sustain global momentum, often without the sheer scale of resources or the established global fandom that a group like BTS might have had later in their career. These mid-tier groups are the real risk takers, the experimenters, and their survival, their breakthroughs, often define the next wave of industry trends. They're the proving ground.
Okay, so we've looked at the giants, we've looked at the diverse mid-tier. Let's try and synthesize all this massive amount of information now. When we look at the strategies of the top groups and the kind of risk-taking happening in the middle ranks, it feels like three huge trends are emerging, shaping the industry right now and definitely its future.
Yeah, I agree. Trend number one is this fundamental shift towards decentralization and the artist identity. It's really a move away from, or at least a modification of, that classic idol factory model, where maybe anonymous corporate producers handled all the key creative decisions behind the scenes.
We saw that clearly with Stray Kids and 17, right? Their success seems deeply tied to that internal control over their music.
Exactly. And it's not just a creative preference anymore. You could argue it's becoming a structural necessity. When members are actively writing, composing, producing internally, the music becomes a more sustainable resource for the group and the company. It's less prone to external delays or dependency on finding the right outside collaborators or even certain contractual issues.
Is there a business advantage too beyond just sustainability?
Oh, definitely. From a purely business perspective, moving away from the total reliance on the idol factory model is strategic. It can reduce dependency on potentially very expensive external star producers. It potentially gives the label and the artists more direct control over the intellectual property, the copyrights. For the artists themselves, that increased autonomy plus potentially higher royalty percentages completely changes the power dynamic.
And for the fans.
And most importantly for the fan, that sense of vulnerability, that genuine artistry they perceive in a self-produced track, it just forges a much stronger, more sustainable, and arguably more authentic bond with the listener. Fans today seem to value that direct connection immensely.
Okay, so decentralization and artist identity is trend one. What's trend two?
Trend two is what I'd call radical genre hybridization. This goes beyond just simple fusion, like adding a rap verse to a pop song. It's a deeper, often cross-cultural integration of global sounds specifically designed to maximize market appeal everywhere.
Can you give some examples of what that looks like in practice?
Sure, we're seeing a real global blending of musical DNA now. Mainstream K-pop is routinely integrating aggressive trap beats, complex electronic sounds, elements borrowed directly from the Western hip-hop and EDM scenes, but they're injecting them into these complex, multi-part pop song structures that are typical of K-pop.
And the other way around.
Simultaneously, yes. We've seen groups like CNCO masterfully merging sophisticated Latin rhythmic elements, touches of reggaeton, bachata, cumbia, but embedding them within universal pop production values that make them accessible globally. It's about finding that sweet spot.
And the ultimate goal here is crossing barriers, right?
Yep.
Linguistic and cultural.
Precisely. It's becoming standard practice for K-pop groups to release full English language songs, specifically designed to capture Western radio play and streaming algorithms immediately. At the same time, groups based in the Americas are consciously blending Spanish and English lyrics within the same song to appeal to multiple demographics. The music itself is aiming to be borderless.
Okay, trend three. This feels like a big one too.
Trend three is the just all-consuming, incredibly high-stakes nature of fan-driven marketing and the demand for 24/7 content. The music itself is often just the starting point, maybe the focal point, but it's the ongoing narrative, the constant sense of access that really builds the sustainable community and, frankly, the revenue stream.
You mean the fans are actually doing the marketing now?
To a huge extent, yes. The entire modern marketing ecosystem relies on hyper-participation from the fans. They're the ones generating the viral TikTok dance challenges. They're creating incredibly sophisticated video edits, fan edits that drive awareness and often frame the group's image online. They organize massive, coordinated streaming parties, often based on complex social media campaigns they devise themselves, specifically to boost chart positions. The fans aren't just passive consumers anymore. They are the active engine of promotion and virality.
Wow. And this demands constant content from the artists to fuel that engine.
Constant. The expectation from the most dedicated parts of the fandom is almost nonstop access. Vlogs showing daily life, reality show style content, behind-the-scenes glimpses of practice or recording, live streams where they just chat. It blurs the line between professional artist and accessible friend.
And how does that translate into money? How is this monetized?
It creates this powerful monetization cycle. Fans pay for subscriptions to get access to the most exclusive content on those gated platforms like Weverse or Bubble. They buy limited edition, often quite costly, tailored merchandise that's tied into specific eras or content releases. The constant engagement fuels the desire for these premium exclusive offerings.
But let me push back on that a bit. What's the potential downside of this constant demand, this 24/7 content cycle? Doesn't this level of relentless exposure lead to artist burnout? Or maybe even authenticity fatigue, where fans start to tire of the seemingly perfect, always-on access?
That's a really essential question about the sustainability of this whole model. And the sources definitely suggest there's a necessary and potentially harsh trade-off. That high level of connection seems to require a high level of sacrifice from the artists. Burnout is a critical, often hidden crisis within the industry. It's why we see periods of staggered member activities, solo projects, or sometimes even officially enforced group hiatuses, partly to manage that relentless pressure.
And the fan side.
Furthermore, the incredibly intense expectations created by that deep, parasocial relationship can, unfortunately, sometimes curdle into toxic fan behavior. Especially if the perceived authenticity dips, or if members make personal choices that parts of the fandom disagree with. The pressure to constantly maintain the approved narrative, the expected image, is terrifyingly high.
So these trends, while driving success, also come with these inescapable challenges. Challenges that are forcing the industry to constantly rethink how they even structure groups for long-term survival.
Exactly. The first major challenge we see across the board is just saturation and the risk of concept fatigue. With dozens, maybe hundreds, of new groups debuting globally every single year, many backed by significant investment capital, the market is just severely saturated.
Which must make it incredibly hard for those mid-tier groups we talked about to stand out.
Incredibly difficult. The result is a high risk of acts starting to sound or look the same sounding music, similar concepts leading to fatigue among listeners, and making it harder for anyone but the absolute biggest players to cut through the noise.
Okay, saturation is one. What's the second big challenge?
The second and arguably more complex structural challenge is the whole issue of longevity and group structure. We've already discussed the impact of mandatory military service in Korea, which forces labels into years of strategic, revenue-preserving maneuvering. But even beyond that, you have the immense financial and legal pressure that comes with contract renewals.
Yeah, that 7-year point again.
Yep. Most initial K-pop contracts are for 7 years, and that contract renewal period is notoriously volatile. The decision for members whether to renew with the group, pursue more solo work, maybe shift agencies entirely like GOT7 did, it's often high drama. It can fracture even successful groups permanently. Add to that just the natural difficulty of maintaining that specific boy band appeal as members inevitably age, mature, and want to explore different solo artistic paths. True longevity requires relentless adaptability in branding and sound, and definitely in group management and structure.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, all these pressures, the market saturation, the mandatory breaks like military service, the intense need for constant but authentic content, the risks around contract renewals, it feels like it's forcing the industry to look for maybe radical new models for the future, perhaps models that don't rely quite so heavily on the fragility or limitations of human artists.
Yeah. Exactly. I think the source material really points us towards the very edges of what even constitutes a modern boy band anymore. And that leads us directly to the final and I think most fascinating question about the unknown future. What comes next? #outro.
Okay, wow. This has been a really intensive deep dive, hasn't it? We've journeyed through the strategies, the structures, the sounds of the most famous modern boy bands right now. We've tried to synthesize this incredibly complex global landscape down to maybe 4 main conclusions we really want you, the listener, to take away from this.
Yeah, 4 key things. Number 1. The modern boy band is fundamentally more artist-driven, more decentralized than its predecessors. Success increasingly demands creative transparency, even radical experimentation directly from the members themselves. It's a definite move away from the old, purely top-down idol factory model.
Right. Number 2, global reach isn't optional anymore, it's essential. And achieving that reach requires complex, deep fan engagement strategies, often using proprietary gated platforms. That engagement now ranks equally with musical quality itself as a pillar of success.
Number 3, don't sleep on the mid-tier groups. They're often the real engine of innovation in the industry. They're the ones taking the vital risks structurally, like NCT or GOT7, or musically, like Brockhampton. They experiment with concepts that often end up paving the way for major industry breakthroughs down the line.
And finally, number 4, longevity in this game is no longer about achieving some kind of static perfection and just maintaining it. It demands relentless, constant adaptability. Adaptability in sound, in branding, and crucially, in structural management to survive this hypersaturated, 204/7 content-hungry ecosystem.
Which brings us to that final provocative question we want to leave you with. Something for you to maybe mull over as you go about your day. If the immense demands of global fame, constant production, and fan interaction are already testing the very limits of human artists, and at the same time the virtual and AI-enhanced landscape is rapidly growing, what kind of structural model do you think will dominate the next decade? Will it be the human collective pushing authenticity? Will it be the AI-enhanced virtual group bypassing human limitations? Or maybe something entirely new like hyper-localized cross-cultural units merging K-pop with Afrobeats? Or something else we haven't even seen yet, shifting the whole center of pop?
Lots to think about there. Keep digging, keep listening, and keep questioning. That's all for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.